Oh, hey there. Guess what? I'm tapping back in with my 6th video in a 10-part video series where I go through each album in Rolling Stone's top 200 greatest hip-hop albums of all time list. I took a few weeks off, dropped a couple of videos for my 20 favorite guitarists, but now I'm back, and what I'm doing is I'm breaking this 200 album list into a 20 album section. This is the 6th one covering numbers 100 through 81. As a lifelong hip-hop fan, I'm offering my reaction and commentary to each entry on Rolling Stone's list. Let's get right into it for numbers 100 to 81. Number 100, it's a sensible pick. It's Run-DMC's monster 1986 album Raising Hell, best known for their collaboration with Aerosmith on the reboot of Walk This Way, which basically offered hip-hop to a new set of ears for the first time. This album actually does stand up nearly 4 decades later as one of Run-DMC's strongest records. It features mid-80s hip-hop classics like Peter Piper, It's Tricky, the title track. Having said that, it is a painfully front-loaded album, and there's a lot of 80s hip-hop albums that kind of suffer from this same problem, but Raising Hell, it's still a revolutionary disc that blazed trails for that explosion of hip-hop during the mid-80s and kind of led into the golden age. It also resurrected the career of one of the 70s most notable rock bands. So this is a legendary album for many reasons. For me, it's probably somewhere between 100 and 150, so Rolling Stone putting it at 100 makes sense. 99, The Carter 2 by Lil Wayne. It's his strongest album, and like Raising Hell, it also had a huge cultural impact, albeit in a much different way, as it established Wayne as one of the kings of the South, as hip-hop's epicenter had shifted south from New York, from LA, as we went into the mid-2000s. It helped ready Wayne for an unprecedented run in the second half of the 2000s. He became a guest spot king after this album. He released a whole bunch of high-profile mixtapes after The Carter 2, and he was one of the main faces of hip-hop by the end of the decade. Now, of course, he had been grinding for a while, but I feel like The Carter 2 was a watershed moment in his career. It mixed some of those chipmunk soul sounds of the day, and Wayne ranged from hedonistic party bars to conscious subject matter just months after Hurricane Katrina devastated his native New Orleans. Some of Weezy's most well-known songs are here, including Hustler Music, Best Rapper Alive, and a personal favorite of mine, Fireman. Would I put it in my top 100? Probably not. I like this album. I don't love it. I think it's Wayne's best. It's understandable, though, at 99. Cool pick at 98. It's Company Flow's Fun Crusher Plus from 1997. The 3-man team consisting of LP, who's kind of a modern-day hip-hop stalwart years and years later, Mr. Len, and Big Just, they deliver one of the most impactful New York underground hip-hop albums ever. During that time where the shiny suit era was going on and kind of ruining mainstream hip-hop and creating a divide, especially on the East Coast, this album, it's bursting with some of the most experimental, forward-thinking beats of all time from LP, and some twirling, abstract rhymes from the trio. It is a long, winding album, but it does feature some of my favorite underground cuts of all time, such as Crazy King's 8 Steps to Perfection, Luna TNS, Last Good Sleep. This was one of the earlier records in Raucous Records' legendary late 90s and early 2000s underground run, again in response to the shiny suit era, and this was one of the weirdest and most unique albums of the bunch. This belongs right inside my top 100 as well, so I like this placement. Company Flow, Fun Crusher Plus, 98. Good job, Rolling Stone. Hell Hath No Fury by Clipse at number 97. I just did Pitchfork's top 100 hip-hop albums list, and this came in at like number 8, which is super overrated. I think a spot inside the top 100 is a lot more appropriate. I think Rolling Stone got this one right too. This album is good, but a lot of people consider this an all-time great. I really don't. I don't know. It just never resonated with me. Look, it's a great album in what was a dog shit year for hip-hop, 2006. The year definitely had some isolated bangers. J Dilla's Donuts, one of the ones that comes to mind, Ghostface Killah's Fish Scale, but overall that was a really rough year for hip-hop output. So Hell Hath No Fury stands pretty tall in a very precarious time, but at the same time, I think their debut, Lord Willin', is probably better than this one. In fact, I actually think their 2025 album, the album of the summer, one of them for me, Let God Sort 'Em Out, is stronger than this one. It's stronger than Lord Willin'. We're obviously not going to see that on this list. This list is from 2022, but if Rolling Stone went back and did it again, I would really hope that Let God Sort 'Em Out would eclipse anything that Clipse did. Get it? Eclipse? Clipse? A little humor there for you, a little play on words. But look, Hell Hath No Fury, while we're on the topic, it does have some solid production from the Neptunes. It was pretty forward-thinking, but it's really Pusha T and Malice that put on a remarkable lyrical performance. If I would include this album in my top 100, which I'm not really sure that I would, that would be the reason why these guys go off on the mic as they are known to. If this is the only Clipse album that we see on the list, I guess it makes sense. Again, I'd make a strong case for 2002's Lord Willin'. And if Rolling Stone decides to update this list in years to come. I really want to see Let God Sort Him Out on here. Interesting pick at number 96. It's Ice-T's second album from 1988, Power. I've actually owned this album for a long time, back when I started collecting records maybe 10, 15 years ago. This is one of the first ones that I bought. But honestly, it really hasn't aged all that well. It's a little bit primitive. It's a little bit stuck in the golden age. There's a lot of albums from that era that have this problem, but I find that Ice-T's early work in particular exhibits this. The album does have some politically and socially conscious leaning bangers like I'm Your Pusher and the title track, but there's a lot of ridiculous tracks that really haven't aged well, honestly. The production from Africa Islam it's solid for 1988, but again, it really hasn't aged so well compared to marquee albums from that era. It's decent. I'm not going to trash it too much because I do think the beats on here are pretty good. They just haven't aged the same way as maybe Public Enemy, let's say. My favorite Ice-T record is actually his second one, 1989's The Iceberg, Freedom of Speech, Watch What You Say. But I think that was harder, that was more forward-thinking production-wise, but Power, I don't know, it was kind of Ice-T's breakout record. It's a mainstay in West Coast Golden Age hip-hop. It's a legendary record. It's not quite in my top 100, but it's not a bad pick by any means, so I understand. 95's the first pick I don't agree with. It's T.I.'s trap music. Now, I think if we're going to pick one T.I. album, it is probably this one, but this belongs somewhere up in the 150 to 200 range for me personally. I've always been kind of lukewarm on T.I. I talked about that shift from the East to the South in the mid-2000s with hip-hop. T.I. was kind of one of those leading figures. I always felt that he was an above-average lyricist, but I just never really got down with his stuff. I don't know, it just didn't strike me as original. That said, there are definitely some interesting cuts here, like Doing My Job, and of course Rubber Band Man, we all know that song, but I just can't justify a top 100 placement for T.I. First pick on this section of the list that I absolutely disagree with. De La Soul is Dead at number 94. I like it. I'd probably put it a little bit higher, maybe in my top 75 personally. When it comes to De La Soul, I absolutely love their first 4 records. This is their second record. I am hoping that we see at least 3 Feet High and Rising and Balloon Mind State later on this list. I feel like we'll see at least one of them. So after establishing what they dubbed the Daisy Age on their first album, which was this kind of like Afrocentric, like hippie almost, peace-loving type hip-hop, they get a little more aggressive on this album as trends started to get more aggressive in hip-hop, specifically on the East Coast in the 90s. They sort of kill off their old persona. They still give us some whimsical, crazy beats from Prince Paul, but it's also slightly rougher. I love the songs Oodles of O's. That song turned me on to De La Soul. There's also a roller skating jam named Saturdays. I think Peas Porridge, incredibly infectious song. I just love that sample. It's just so fun-loving. Ring Ring Ring, one of my favorite De La Soul songs. So anyway, De La Soul is Dead. A little underrated for me, not by much though. Glad to see it here. Here is a polarizing album with equally polarizing placement. Death Certificate by Ice Cube at number 93. I consider this one of the best West Coast hip-hop albums of all time. Early Ice Cube was a force to be reckoned with. There are parts of this album that are pretty transgressive, which I do think has hurt its legacy. Though for me, that's not to the point where it would kick Death Certificate anywhere outside the top 50. 93 is too low for me. This is an album that doubled down on that wild political energy off of Cube's debut just a year earlier. He was pissed off after being ousted from NWA. He continues that crazy hardcore energy. And while that first record had production from the Bomb Squad, best known for their work with Public Enemy, and had more of an East Coast leaning sound, Cube brought in Sir Jinx and the Boogeymen for a more funky West Coast oriented sound. Some of the funkiest cuts of Cube's career are here, such as My Summer Vacation, Steady Mobbin'. There are definitely more serious, conscious songs like Colorblind, which tells the ills of violent gang life, which was a huge thing in LA at that time, still is today, as well as A Bird in the Hand, which profiles the precarious life of a hustler. And then there's just straight up outlandish, borderline racist songs like Black Korea. Like, what is that? Anyway, it's a wild mix of charisma and energy from Cube. Overall, it's just a banger of an album that features one of the most furious lyrical performances of all time. That's why 93, it's just a bit too low. This should be like 40 to 50 spots higher, but I understand how its legacy may have been hurt by some of its transgressive subject matter. 92, that's an album I'm glad to see here. I think it's too low. It's DJ Shadow's 1996 classic, Introducing. This is, I think, my favorite instrumental hip-hop album of all time. It's pretty much neck and neck for me with Jay Dilla's Donuts. This, of course, was made about 10 years earlier. It's got a more down-tempo mood to it. It features some stunning sampling from this Bay Area DJ. He chops together some incredible pieces like Building Steam with a Grain of Salt and Midnight in a Perfect World. This album, it's just a vibe. It's a great nighttime nocturnal album. It features some of the most unique hip-hop soundscapes of the 90s. That's a bold statement. It's a clinic in turntablism and plunderphonics. I think 92, it's just too low. This would make more sense for me about 25, 30 spots higher. This record is a must listen if you're a fan of forward-thinking sampling and turntablism, great album, wish it was higher. We got another album, another classic that's way too low. This one back to the golden age. It's Boogie Down Productions' Criminal Minded, number 91. This was another album that really kicked off hip-hop's golden age as the late 80s emerged, and while I agree that this hasn't aged fantastically because the production is honestly a little bit skeletal and primitive, its message is a very strong one of the strongest of the era, courtesy of a young KRS-One who kicks wisdom and truth of that from somebody maybe twice his age. He established himself single-handedly on this record right away as one of the golden age's leading MCs. Cudi from Ultramagnetic MCs, KRS-One himself, and DJ Scott LaRock, who was tragically slain just months after this album came out, are responsible for the beats, which when you look at other 1987 hip-hop albums, Criminal Minded sounded probably better than anything except for Eric B. and Rakim's Paid in Full. That said, I don't think this should be just inside the top 100. This is probably on the brink of the top 50 for me. Rolling Stone has had a theme of disrespecting classics throughout this list. This is just the latest example. I understand the skeletal beats haven't aged well, but this is not number 91. This deserves to be way higher. And here's why. Number 90, Man on the Moon, The End of the Day by Kid Cudi. You're going to put that ahead of Criminal Minded, Death Certificate, Introducing, De La Soul's Dead, and so many other classics that came in outside the top 100? Oh, just no. I understand the impact of this album. Cudi was a bit of a visionary, I guess, when he came out. But this album is quite a bit overrated, and it does mix lush synth pop with like early cloud rap tendencies that led, for better or for worse, to the way that hip-hop would sound as the 2010s emerged. But I still can't justify a top 100 placement. Day and Night has become a staple of modern hip-hop. I get that. That is a very good song. Songs like Pursuit of Happiness, also decent, but nothing can convince me to put this in my top 100. I actually think Kid Cudi kind of led hip-hop in a soft, senseless direction. I'm just not a big fan of that sound. I am, however, acknowledging the fact that this was one of the first albums to lead hip-hop in that direction. There were trails blazed on this thing. The evolution of hip-hop is something that's very interesting and important to me. But overall, the album kind of just bores me. Kid Cudi is not one of my favorite artists. And number 90, that's not a good pick. 89, though, is one I agree with. It's perfect placement for Brand Nubian's 1990 debut, One For All. This is the group's finest record. The trio of Sadat X, Grand Puba, and Lord Jamar combined for a late golden age classic here. This is one that's constantly underrated. I don't see how you can put this ahead of a number of classics that we've already covered, but overall, I'm a big fan of how the three MCs trade off of each other. I think Sadat X is one of the most underrated MCs of all time. Puba is just a fun guy to listen to, and Lord Jamar, he's definitely the weakest of the bunch. Plus, he's become a bit of a bigot in recent years, so there's that. Otherwise, this is a conscious Afrocentric leaning album. Many albums in that day were. These guys self-produced their way through about half of the beats on this thing. You also have musical contributions from the Stimulated Dummies, Dante Ross, Skeff Anselm. Some of the best hip-hop songs of 1990 are on here. I love the opener All For One. Step to the Rear is great. Dance to My Ministry. I've been spinning Slow Down somehow. I knew about this back when I was in 9th grade. I agree with this album being in the top 100, but not too deep into it. I think this is a great pick from Rolling Stone. Cypress Hill's self-titled 1991 debut at number 88. I think it's another solid placement. I'd personally move this up about 10 or 15 spots. I have a bit of an affinity for Cypress Hill. I've always loved those guys. I do also think there's two Cypress Hill albums that should be ahead of this one, which I really hope we see at least one of them. I like this pick overall. Cypress Hill hailed from South Los Angeles, in particular the city of Southgate. They came out with a very interesting and unorthodox sound for a West Coast group, as their DJ and producer Muggs was a New York guy who went west. So their early stuff sounds a lot more East Coast leaning than their home locale would suggest. Be Real and Sendog, they provide a nice back and forth, sort of a diversity, a yin and a yang type thing with their voices. Be Real's nasal signature voice really did emerge right here on this debut. The beats, they're hazy, they're funky, and Cypress were really one of the first acts to dive deep into that weed culture. There's some late golden age West Coast classics here, such as the 1-2 punch of How I Could Just Kill a Man and the awesome Hand on the Pump. Love that Duke of Earl sample. You also have the funky Feel one, Real Estate, and the bouncy, infectious Latin lingo, man. I love that song. And I've loved this album for many years, and while it isn't quite up to the same quality of the next two records, it's a formidable debut, and it's absolutely worthy of a spot in the top 100. Alright, Critical Beatdown by Ultramagnetic MCs at number 87. Here's another one I would rank quite a bit higher. This goes in my top 50. 1988 was a crowded, eventful year, especially on the East Coast. Kool Keith gives one of the most memorable performances of the entire golden age, coming out with this unorthodox unorthodox nasal style with some outlandish bars that somehow managed to be hard as hell. It's mostly him and Ced G on the mic, and Ced G sounds just as fresh and energetic. He's got a different voice, different sort of delivery. But what really set this album aside is the beats, courtesy mostly of Ced G. And a lot of hip-hop during the 80s was experimental to a certain degree as the genre was kind of just fledgling. This was really far out there. This is possibly the first kind of retroactively experimental hip-hop album, if you will. Experimental hip-hop is a subgenre that's very common these days. This had super innovative, wild sampling with these almost extraterrestrial beats. Ease Back is my favorite cut off this album. I think Kool Keith absolutely slayed that track over the same sample used that same year by Public Enemy on Terminator X to the Edge of Panic. The title track is a classic. Ced G shines on the closer, his solo cut Delta Force 1, which ends the album on a killer note, but 87 is too low. I think this album really influenced other albums that were soon to come in the golden age. This album blazed trails for the expansion of sampling in hip-hop, as well as those unorthodox rhyme schemes and cadences. Cut this thing's placement in half, put it somewhere in like the first half of the 40s, then I'd agree 87 is too low for Critical Beatdown. 86 is Like Water for Chocolate by Common. Also think this one's a bit too low. I'd put it probably somewhere between 60 and 70 of all time. Look, it's a long, ambitious album, but it's got an all-star roster of guest producers and artists. It's one of the first albums that saw that Soulquarians collective come together. That featured Jay Dilla, who produced about half the tracks off of this album. You also had Questlove from The Roots. You had D'Angelo, as well as a few other musicians. This is a conscious effort from Common that doesn't sacrifice any of his streetwise attitude that he established in the 90s. And while Common really does come correct on this album, it's the soundscapes that make Like Water for Chocolate as good as it is. The Soulquarians absolutely lace this thing, give this a jazzy, groovy vibe that's sometimes a little bit serious, especially when Common gets deeply conscious on the mic, which happens quite a bit throughout this thing's like 78-minute runtime. But there's also more positive moments on here, like the quintessential hip-hop love song, The Light. There's so many great guest spots on this thing. Outside of the Soulquarians, you have Black Thought from The Roots, Bilal, Mos Def, Slum Village, the well-calculated soundscapes and heavy messaging at times. It actually can be a lot to digest because there's just so much to unpack on this album. I think that plus the long runtime is the only reason I wouldn't rank it a little bit higher. I do, however, think Like Water for Chocolate deserves a little more respect. 86 is about 20 spots too low for me. Alright, now Rolling Stone's gonna make the white kid talk about Eminem here. Number 85, we have Eminem's 1999 debut, the Slim Shady LP, and obviously to a white kid like me, Eminem was pretty important when he came out. I will say though, I was listening to hip-hop before Eminem. I'm proud to say that. This album, I think it's pretty appropriately placed here. I'd put it maybe in the 90s. I think it goes inside the top 100 though. And this was revolutionary in its own way, almost in the same vein as Run-DMC's Raising Hell breaking hip-hop to white kids for the first time. The Slim Shady LP kind of did that as well, just, 10 or 12 years later. So the album features dastardly, well-calculated rhymes and a very distinct cadence from Eminem that did take a bit of influence, let's call it, from guys like Masta Ace. Anyway, the subject material, it's mostly mischievous and comical, though M does get conscious on songs like Tired, where he really tells a pretty harrowing tale of life and poverty. That was his reality before he was discovered by Dr. Dre and signed and this album came out. He was living in hell for a while. Speaking of Dr. Dre, he did do a few beats on this album. He executive produced the whole thing. The Bass Brothers and Eminem himself also contributed beats, but again, this was sort of Dre's brainchild and one of the things that really does define Dr. Dre's legacy. Look, the Slim Shady LP, it's a very good album, I'm not gonna lie. I mostly agree with this placement. I do want to say one thing on a closing note. The song I'm Shady is hella fun. Perfect placement, number 84. Perfect placement for Summertime 06 by Vince Staples. I love this album. I think Vince Staples is in that second tier of these great West Coast millennial rappers. Let's put Vince in the A tier and let's put Kendrick Lamar and Tyler, the Creator, in the S tier. Vince was a force to be reckoned with when he emerged in the early to mid 2010s, at first on his Shine Cold Chain mixtapes. He also had a few guest spots on early Odd Future records. He really shined on Earl Sweatshirt's 2013 album Doris, but what really broke him out was that 2014 EP leading up to this album, Hell Can Wait. Man, what a project that was. That caught my attention and I was like, who the hell is this guy? So Summertime 06, like I said, came out the year after. It really showed that Vince could hold his own through a full album. He did rap about street-centric topics and paid homage to the gangster rap era that he was raised on in his native Long Beach, California. He did it with some interesting beat selection selection that bordered on electronic and danceable at times. I want to say something about that West Coast scene of the early to mid 2010s. There was a lot of generic sounding stuff. A lot of it was like DIY, and it was these guys putting out mixtapes, and Vince never sounded that way. He always sounded so original and set himself aside. He kept it cold as ice on songs like North North, which was another one of his big breakout songs, and it's the marquee track off Summertime '06. But he also touched on conscious material, relationships, personal growth. There's a great amount of both sonic diversity as well as diverse subject material across this thing. And while I might give a nod to his next album, 2017's Nearly Perfect Big Fish Theory, as his best record, I'm not mad at all to see Summertime '06 inside the top 100. Great job by Rolling Stone. I love Vince Staples. I love this album. Great pick. 83, M.I.A.'s Kala. There was a period back in the day where I was really feeling her, but due to a lot of her recent ridiculous and confusing political stances and frankly anti-vaccine views, I've pretty much deleted her from my musical lexicon. Perhaps this is one of those situations where I have to learn better to separate the art from the artist, but I'm just over her. I don't know. She was in her day very original. She put UK hip-hop on the map in the mid-2000s when it really started to emerge en masse. She mixed it up with a number of different interesting electronic music leaning styles. These styles really did become more common in hip-hop globally, not just in the UK, after her first two albums, this being her second. I don't really even think though that this is her best record. I do prefer her debut RLR to this one, but for what it's worth, Kala isn't a bad album if you can separate that art from the artist, and it sucks because M.I.A. used to stand for so many good things. This record is of course driven by the smash Paper Planes, and while the rest of the record's pretty interesting, its quality isn't quite up to par for me. Again, M.I.A. has become an insufferable idiot in recent years, so maybe there's a little bit of a bias, but this and her debut, they were revolutionary albums, but I just can't put any of her work in my top 100, knowing the things that I do. Yeah, Slick Rick's The Great Adventures of Slick Rick coming in at number 82. This is an interesting choice for me. It's probably one that I just put right outside maybe of my top 100. Rick was one of the golden age's most prolific storytellers and lyricists. His stories are so detailed and layered. Here on his 1988 debut, he spins iconic tales on songs like Mona Lisa and especially Children's Story. There are other introspective cuts on here like Hey Young World and Teenage Love, but what holds this album back for me are three tracks in particular. You have the ridiculous opener, Treat Her Like a Prostitute. It's got a booming beat, but like, why? What is the subject matter? You have the extremely cringy Indian Girl, and the closer, Lick the Balls, which, again, at the end of the album has me just saying, why? I don't know. He was young. I think he was like 19 when he made this album. Whatever. I guess it can be forgiven, but these songs have aged terribly. Rick was so talented lyrically, still one of hip-hop's best writers after all these years, but this stupid, vulgar side of his just really didn't age well. I know some of it is in jest. There's a comedic aspect to this album. You can't take everything so seriously. The comedic aspect does give The Great Adventures of Slick Rick some true personality and footing, but in the case of those three tracks, it's just stupid. In context, it holds the album back as a whole, and while I think Children's Story is one of the greatest hip-hop songs of one of the greatest hip-hop years of all time, the entire album that it's off of raises eyebrows for me because of how poorly big chunks of it have aged. It's a 10-track album, and 3 of those tracks are just so terrible. You get rid of those 3, and maybe we're talking top 50, top 75 in my book. Finishing out this 6th section of the list, we have Blowout Comb by Digable Planets. Excellent pick at number 81. The trio of Butterfly, Ladybug Mecca, and Doodlebug exploded the year before in 1993 with their debut album Reachin', a new refutation of time and space, and that actually included a Grammy win for the album's lead single, Rebirth of Slick, Cool Like That. They come back a year later with a decidedly more conscious, less accessible, and deeply jazzy effort. It had strong Afrocentric tendencies, which in my eyes, I think all these things put together make Blowout Comb a better album than Reachin'. And don't get me wrong, Reachin' was an excellent debut. So the trio, they doubled down on some of these conscious tendencies from their first album, and musically, here's where this really gets set aside from its predecessor. The compositions, they're more extended, they're a bit more complex, a bit more progressive. They feature a ton of live instrumentation. You have the songs Black Ego and Four Corners. If there was a genre called progressive rap, those two songs would be kind of the poster children for the subgenre. The song Burrow Check with the late great guru of Gangstar, who was getting really into jazz and rap crossovers himself at the time. That's another standout on this album. So the jazz influence heavily utilized. I love it. The live instrumentation, the arrangement, it's excellent. It's a gorgeous, introspective, groovy, and enjoyable, but also scathingly serious at times record. It's unbelievably underrated. I'd argue a top 75 placement for this one overall. 81 works for me. Hey, that's it for numbers 100 to 81. I'll be back in the next episode, episode episode 7 with numbers 80 through 61. As always, I appreciate all you guys who continue to tune in and support the series and my channel. Like and subscribe if you enjoy what you're seeing. You know I couldn't do this without you. You guys are the lifeblood of my entire operation here. Go check me out on Instagram and TikTok as well. I drop a lot more bite-sized type videos over there. But for here and now, let me know in the comments below your thoughts on the 20 albums I covered in this section. And hey, I'll see you guys next time.